Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, David Pruitt.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, www.studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our previous episodes, show notes, blog articles, and much more. Our goal is that you are inspired, encouraged, and that the things that you hear on this podcast would equip you to be a better student pastor for the church that you are serving in. All right, let's get into it. So this episode is a little bit more unique in the sense that I have a husband and wife team, my friends Arthur and Laura Martinez over at Snyder First Assembly here in Snyder, Texas. It's super cool to be able to serve with these guys, and we'll talk a little bit about how our two churches are kind of intertwined in a lot of ways. We were talking about that a little bit before we got started. But before we get into that, I would love to have you guys get to know these guys just a little bit. So if you guys would please tell us a little bit about yourselves, your family, and your role at your church.
Okay, well, my name is Laura, and this is my husband, Arthur, as he said.
How's it going?
We have just taken over youth ministry at Snyder First Assembly, and we actually have we were went blank. Well, we are now forward ministry at Snyder First Assembly. We just renamed our ministry this July, and so
with the help of David.
Yes, with the help of David. And so our name is Forward Ministry now. And we have been going to our church for 6 years and have been serving the Lord. We are a family of 7. We have 2 boys and 3 girls. Our oldest is Christopher, Isaiah, Aubrey, Aaliyah, and Amra. 3 of them are youth, and so that is why we are youth ministry, I guess you could say. So that is interesting in its own self, in its own book, having them in there with us. And
that means we don't go out to eat a lot because feeding 7 is a lot. So, yes, we recently got married here in the Methodist Church, which is now Grace Fellowship Church here 5 years ago. And so like he said, the 2 churches are basically like brothers and sisters because we do everything kind of together, and we just kind of realized that. And I don't know, what else do you have to say about who we are? Well, to start off with, I said, I'm Arthur, Laura, and we got 7 altogether. All of us in a ride is 7. We didn't start off going to church. It took us a while, but like anything, it takes time. And one day we were at a rent house, and at our rent house, we had stayed there for almost 4 years, and we both made a decision that it was time. And because, once you don't, now that I follow God, I don't know how I did it without the Lord, if that makes sense. And that's why I encourage, and I like to say drill, because I'm basically a drill sergeant to these teenagers. We know how the youth are, and it's harder to reach these youth now because of the device that they have in their phones and everything that surrounds them. We only have an hour and a half with them, and the world has them every day, every minute after that. So we have to try just twice as hard. But we we went to church and went to Snyder First Assembly, and we told each other that we were going to sit in the front, and we were going to sit in the front, and we were going to learn everything we could, and we were going to do everything we were supposed to. And if they asked for help, we were going to help. And if it didn't work out, then hey, we tried. And that's where we went. And I mean, we gelled like jelly. I mean, we were in there. And next thing you know, we got onto the serve team, and I started on camera, and my wife started in the back because she loves babies. And so she started back there at nursery, and I went from doing the camera to now I'm the first one in the church and the last one to leave. So, I mean, I make sure that everything's viewed on YouTube and on Facebook and on our website and our church website. And I'm in control of all that. I mean, I'm an assistant, but I like to make sure that my guy Adam, he runs the show, but that he has a family too. So I make sure to take some of that burden off of him, so he can do his thing. And if he needs to go out of town, don't be ashamed or don't be scared to ask me, hey, can you take over this Sunday? I'm like, man, for sure, bro. Like, I'll be here by the clock, 8 a.m. I'll be here. So just to make him feel like, he don't have to thank me, because I do this. Why I do this. Why we do this is for the Lord. So in all saying, we picked up our baton and we took off running with it. And when our calling was called to teach the youth, and I had my wife, she likes the school. Obviously, she works in the school now. I barely liked my own kids. I didn't like teenagers. They talk back and they look at you in angry faces. And I grew up to, if somebody looked at you some type of way, it was really offensive. And now I tell my kids I will cut for them. I got their backs. Man, I love my youth, and anything somebody says something bad about my youth, I get pretty upset, and I got their backs, and that's my group. And just like David would do with his, and it's awesome. It's been a ride, and we've had a lot of ups more than downs, and we give the glory to God for all of that, because a lot of people have had a lot of more downs than ups, and we've been on the other side of that coin. So we've been pretty blessed.
For sure, man. Our topic for today is talking about obedience, and I definitely think that's a huge part of y'all's story, from what I know. How do you feel like obedience has been a part of your roles, like stepping into your role in ministry? And if you guys don't mind talking a little bit about how, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but especially for you, Arthur, I'd love to hear, or at least love to let our listeners hear about your journey into ministry, and stepping into that role. Because like you said, it was not something that was on your radar at all, but it's amazing how God can completely change the narrative, whether we're looking for it or not.
Oh, that's for sure. Sorry.
Well, for me with the youth and saying yes, I had already kind of tiptoed into it. I had already been helping just kind of as a leader, and I knew I needed to go there. My job, I always worked all day on Wednesdays, and I kind of already knew that's where I was needing to go and needing to be led to. And so about, I want to say almost 3 years ago, I had asked off to start taking off Wednesday nights so I could go and help out on Wednesday nights. And so I kind of had already told myself I needed to be there, and that's where I needed to be. However, Arthur was not. And he's like, no. And so me and him kind of was, going back and forth. And I was like, look, hey, I think you need to be there. I think this is what you need to do. I think this is where you need to be plugged in. And he's just like, no, like I do where I need to serve. I serve where I need to serve at. And he's like, that's you. And I was just like, okay. And so, the Lord hears your prayers. So you keep praying and you keep praying. And just felt like that's where we were being called to. And actually, the Lord had actually already spoken. Someone had already spoken over Arthur and told him that he would lead many to, he would be a father figure to many. And so that kind of just was like, stayed over me. And, but was also said that if we rushed it, it would make a mess of things. And so that just was, okay. And so for like I said, for like 2 years, I kept kind of, my heart was just with them. And I've always said that, like I've always, I could always hang out with my son. Like I said, my oldest son is a sophomore, and I could always hang out with his friends. Like I always wanted to do stuff with them or take them places and let them all be at the house and hang out. And just, so I knew that they were doing the right thing and doing good things. Like I wanted to be that house. I wanted to be the house where they could hang out. When we went and looked for our home, almost 3 years ago, and it's crazy how all of that was around the same time. Like I looked for a big floor plan. I looked for a big old house where I could have host team dinners. And in my head, that's what I was doing, was hosting team dinners. And that's what I thought. That's what I was visioning. But in all reality, I was really visioning the youth being there, I guess. Yeah. And that's what the Lord was telling me. That's who I was going to have in my home. And so I knew that's where I was going. I knew that's where my heart was at. I knew that's where I was at. And Arthur did not. He just still was just like, no, like, babe, I don't even like our kids half the time. And you always want everybody here. And I'm just like, because like, at least we know they're doing right. And at least we know they're doing good, and they're not out in the streets and can get hurt. And, because the world can consume them. And so, that's just where we were at. And it just kept coming to me. And when the ministry fell into our hands and for us to take over, I was scared. I still was just kind of like, I knew I wanted it, but at the same time, it's a big responsibility, and it's like, do you do it? Do you not? Because it's huge. And at the same time, anytime I was asked to do something for the Lord, I always said yes, because I didn't want to be disobedient to him. And so I always said yes, like even simple things like going up and speaking and doing prayer and opening or anything like that for our church. I always said yes, even scared. I said yes. And so when we got asked to take over the ministry, my answer was yes. It was a scared yes, but it was yes. And
it was probably a yes before we talked about it, but
yeah. And Arthur, he had told me, he literally, and I want to share this part. He can share it too. But I remember having the conversation with him. We're laying in bed, and he's like, my answer is no. He's like, it's no. He's like, unless the Lord tells me, it's no. And I'm like, laying there like, okay. And I was like, I remember going to bed and praying and saying like, Lord, if this is your will, you have to tell me yes. I'm not going to pray and say, please tell him yes. You have to tell him yes. Well, that night he has a dream, I guess, like as soon as he goes to sleep, and he dreams that he's in a classroom teaching. And he wakes up, and he wakes me up, and he's like, oh, I'm mad. And he's like, it's the plainest day answer. I'm like, and so the next day, like, we're quiet. I don't say anything. And he's like, all right, we're doing it. Like, there it is. But that's mine. I guess like being obedient to him, even though it's scary, it's a scary yes. And it's just, I don't know if that's really answering the question on that part, but.
Let's go. I say for obedience and to how everything started, I think we start with our little yeses, and it's like, can you hold the door once a month on a Sunday? Can you do this? And it's like yes, and it's yes, and then eventually those yeses, they get to be more comfortable. And that's where, the Lord is like, I'm getting you ready to keep saying yes, because if you always say no, every time someone asks you something that's, either if it's from the flesh, like, hey, do you want to go to, a restaurant to go eat? It's like, yeah, I was like, let's go for sure, and it's like, hey, do you want to open or you want to close this Sunday? And it's like, oh, no. So if you just keep continuing to say yes, for something that you can handle, like I said, I think it prepares you to say yes for the grander things. And being obedient, I think it's like just simply, like I was saying earlier, simply just showing up for the kids. And I don't like to call them kids, but it slips out, and I always correct myself when I'm preaching. But just showing up for them, because a lot of them, they have they think they have these different problems, and we have different problems, but they're almost the same. It's either something in their family, either a brother or a sister or an uncle or aunt, and I mean, I'm not saying they're all the same, but they all kind of in there. You can put them into like a couple of categories, and I believe that, I was, the way I was raised and to where I'm here, I'm living my testimony. You know what I mean? So I know that everything that I've learned, everything I've been through, I've learned, and now I know why I went through everything. And I don't encourage anybody to, oh, I got to go live a bad life so I can be this person. No, you can live, you don't have to get in trouble. You don't have to follow the crowd. You don't have to do this to be somebody great. You can be great now. It took me 30.
You have to have the heart?
Why do you have to have the heart? It took me 33 years. I'm 33 years old, just turned 33. And I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. But if I would have had a youth ministry to go to when I was younger, if I would have had, someone that was always, I have Julian. Julian was a nagger. So he always nagged on me, man. But if I had more of that, and I had flyers everywhere, and I had fields of faith, and I had all these things that we have now, because we're all of us, Josh and Beto and all of us, we're doing things, and we're out there doing things, and youth are noticing, and they're like, hey, even if they don't want to go, they're going with a friend.
Right.
And that's how you plant that seed. And when you plant that seed, there you go. I mean, just like any other fruit tree, I mean, it takes time for it to bear. And some you got to take care a little more than others, and some just, they're ready for the season. But obedience, it's just showing up, saying yes, like my wife said, saying yes and showing up and just being there for them.
Oh, for sure. I think about, and I had totally forgotten about this until we were talking before, but, again, it's easy to see just from the outside perspective, hearing Evan and Nancy talk about you guys and how incredible y'all were, and being able to serve, especially with Laura several times, at various events in town. But I had totally forgotten, and maybe just didn't realize that your first preaching opportunity was at our church. Like we were talking about that before. What was that like for you?
I forgot. Oh, I came to see Leslie. She's been our friend for a long time, and she was preaching. So I had a chance to come. She didn't get to come. I came by myself, and I came to support her. And something was telling me to talk to Brother Ryan, and I was like, I'm just gonna stay away from this guy, like, because when the Lord is pulling, you kind of try to push back. And at that time in my life, I was still a pusher. So when I finally I end up, they were like, hey, this is our pastor Ryan, this is this and that. And I was like, hey, what's up, brother? And like word vomit. I was like, hey, I like to type devotionals all the time, like, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, well, let's fit you in. He's like, we'll find a date for you. And I'm like, I was like, and at that time I'm like, I like to say yes, and then let's just do it, and then we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Like, because the Lord
Sink or
is
swim
the Lord
type of
is
thing.
in control, and it wouldn't happen if it wasn't supposed to happen. So
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I'm down, and it's like, just text me a date, and I got his number, and then he shot me a message not even that long ago, like right after that, the same day, and he was like, I have an opening for the 20 something if you're ready, and I was like, yeah, I'm ready, let's go. And yeah, like, it was amazing. It was, I got to preach, I think, a couple of weeks after that, and I told my congregation that I rocked the house. I used
You
those words
did
in
rock
it.
the house, though.
And I was like, for my first one, I was pretty proud. But all glory to God, that wasn't me. So I give that to Him, and it's been, like I said, we took that baton and we were running, and we're still running. So it's been great.
For sure. It's amazing. Like, it's easy for us as student pastors to get into a place where we're like, well, yeah, we know all about obedience, right? And we preach it constantly to our students. But man, what about when you get asked to do things that are not necessarily in the job description? Think about that. Like, especially for those who, we had talked about this a little bit beforehand, especially for bivocational youth pastors. There's so many churches that I hear from that talk about, man, it's like, I love serving in my church, but I totally volunteer. I'm leading. I've got another job outside of it, but yet my church wants me to work full time. And they have expectations, do this, this, and this. And for those that are listening who are in similar positions like that, it can be so hard, I think, to come to a place where you can say yes, because sometimes your job gets in the way, right? Like, sometimes it's a situation where it's like, man, I want to be at all the events, and I want to be able to go to all the games and do all the things. And how do I balance obedience to my calling that God has given me while also providing for my family? I mean, you guys do have a big family, and there are definitely obligations on both sides of that. So how do you guys juggle being obedient while having jobs outside of the church as well as inside the church?
I'll let you answer this one first.
Well, juggling youth, and I work in the oil field, so I'm up at. There was a time where I was going to the gym before I went to the oil field, so I was up at 3:30, and I would come back home at 5 and shower up, and at 5:30, from 5 to 5:30, I was reading, and then 5:30 they'd pick me up, and I would get home about, when the time changed, I was getting home about, I would leave when it was dark, and I'd come home when it was dark. And I missed a lot, not just with youth, but with my family. And now I think with youth now, I get to be with them more, because I mean, it's like, hey guys, we're going to do this. We're going. Yeah, I need y'all's help. And even my little one, she's in kids ministry, and she's a jumper. She likes to sing and dance. She likes to outdance the leaders, and
Nice.
she's my little angel. She's our little angel. But like today, even making, being able to make it here. I didn't know you didn't see my hands this morning, but or just now, but I got just from working, and I didn't think I was going to make it, because out of all days, today had to be late. When you want to do something, it's when we're going to stay late today. And I just think that if it's supposed to happen, it's supposed to happen. And I try not to get too mad, because when I try to force something, like, I need to tell my boss, like, I will tell him, hey, in passing, like, I got something important today. But once I say that, I leave it like that. I try not to be like, get in his face and be like, hey man, I told you I have something to do today. And then that makes a whole mess, and that goes like another road. And I try to, like, I always just, I pray, and I'm like, all right, Lord, if you want this to happen, I need you to show up. And next thing you know, something goes down, and it's like, hey guys, we're about to make it to the house, and it's like, like, I'm glad, like, why do I doubt you? Why do I doubt you sometimes? Like, and that's real, man. I and it's easy to doubt. And it's easy because you see how you think you know how the day is going to end, and next thing you know, something just happens, and then God is like, well, you thought, like, I've heard so many times, you want to hear God laugh, tell him that you have a plan.
Mhm.
So, and I think about that all the time, and I'm like, well, Lord, today I need this to happen, this, and that, and I'm just like, all right, you just tell me what happens, I'll just go, and but that's I don't know. I like I said, I just leave it to the Lord, to be honest. Like, if this was supposed to happen today, it was supposed to happen.
Yeah, I don't think he's missed any Wednesday nights, like any youth nights, since we've taken over, actually, which is kind of crazy because
it is
at all. I really don't think he's missed any Wednesday nights.
Wow.
Well, I'm one preaching, so I can't.
I know. I'm like, I really don't think he's missed any. I know that he's not gotten to make it to, in the mornings and stuff. And I know he's gotten a little upset about some of that. But other than that, like, I know everything, like he said, everything's kind of happened in favor. For me, I know that now that I'm at the school, I know it's kind of a little bit more open for me, but I know that I'm a bit more busy as well. I know that I've had multiple conversations with the Lord here recently. And I tell Arthur all the time, like, I'm in the school. I'm in the school for my job. And, it's I'm the attendance person. PEMS attendance, and I'm in there and I'm doing all this stuff. And then, right now, I'm just going to share a little insight. I feel like Arthur and I's, who, as in the youth, I feel like what the Lord is working on us with is, the lost and the broken and the ones that feel like they're too far gone and that there's no way out. Like, I feel like that's who the Lord is straying us towards. And I've caught myself at work, like, I'll have, some students come in and they're, telling me, what all they're going through, or they'll come in and there's this and there's that. And my heart's just like shattered for them, or I'm talking to them. And so I'm like, I'm feeling that, and I'll start praying. But then I'm like, I'm busy at work also. And so I'm doing all this stuff at work, and it gets overwhelming at times. And I'm sitting there like, okay, I got all this stuff to do. And I'm like, get frustrated. And then I hear from the Lord, and he's like, you're here at the school because that's your job, but that's not why you're here.
Right.
And then I'll have a student come in that's having a moment or having something, and it's like he's telling me that's why you're here.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's happened a lot here recently. He's like, yeah, you're in the building because it's your job, but that's not why I have you here. And so, that's just been pretty awesome here lately.
Oh, for sure. Man, when you think about that, it's like, how many opportunities, you were talking about, saying no versus yes, and like the little yeses, and how God will use those to lead us to bigger yeses, right? I think that's a big part of obedience. Is so many times we think, sometimes our own insecurities can get in the way. I know for me, inside our church, there's so many things that you get pulled to. And some days, like today, even, where I felt like, man, I don't know if I can, how am I going to balance everything I've got going on today versus tomorrow versus, high school lunch with Thursday. And then I've got a meeting after that, and several other things. And I had 3 meetings today on top of some of the things. And it's just like, man, and I'm looking forward to see at the pole and Fields of Faith. And I know that day is going to be nuts. And we were talking about that earlier. It's like, I start with prayer, and then I'm leading worship for 3 different, See you at the polls, and then we've got worship that night for Fields of Faith, and then we also have a wrapper after that because we're extra. Because it's awesome and our students love it.
Texas,
why
man,
not?
We gotta go big or go home.
Exactly.
We ain't going home. So.
No, we're not. So it's like,
definitely not going home.
all right. And so it's like, and it's easy to get overwhelmed and think, man, how in the world am I going to make the time work and also juggle my family and everything else like that, because that's been a big part of something I've been thinking about as my son's getting older. He's 6 years old, and after being gone almost the entire summer for camps and mission trips, and you guys know all about that, experiencing that this summer, y'all kind of jumped right into that, right?
That was our first time ever leaving our little one.
That's hard. That's so hard, you know. And at first my son's like, yeah, of course, that's what we do, you know. Right. You have all these things. By the end of the summer, that last camp, he literally looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "You're not going anywhere." And I'm like, oh, how do I devastate this kid? But at the same time, like, he has to understand this is work, and this is what God has called our family to do. And so it's like, how do you balance the yeses and the nos, and like, how do you know what to say no to? And I think it's really cool what you said earlier about just trusting that God is going to put you where you need to be.
Oh, for sure.
Especially in the oil field. Like, that's a very consuming job. And to not miss a Wednesday is a huge testament of how God has been able to use your faithfulness.
I got to where I take my own truck to work because depending on what time we get off, I mean, we have guys that live on all the other side of town, and we have another guy that lives on the other side of town. And so the driver has to drop off each guy, and driving the speed limit, it takes 30 minutes to get home.
Of course.
And that's because we're in Snyder. And I'm like, drop me off at the yard. I was like, my church is right there. And I was like, I will drive myself there. So you have to learn how to, like, I can't just be like, hey babe, I'm going to be late because my guy's taking forever to drop everybody off. It's like, how can I make that better? It's like, well, you can take your truck once a week to your job, and then you can, it's like, what? Don't worry about gas, because don't worry about anything. Just you do what you have to do, and I'll take care of the rest.
Yeah.
But
that's huge. I feel like that's the biggest part of leading with obedience, is just saying, God, we're in this because you've called us to it. We wouldn't be in it if you didn't, because we all know that it's worth it in the end when you start putting, pen to paper and seeing all the different things that God is using us to do. But I mean, if it was solely for money, none of us would be doing this, right?
Yeah.
That's not the why. And I think maybe that's the biggest takeaway that I can come to for why be obedient to this calling is we have to understand what our why is in the first place, because God has called us to it. And when God calls us to something like this, like ministry, like serving these students, we have to remember that God is the one who's equipping us, and God is the one who will provide. And it's not, I quote this all the time because it's my favorite verse. It's almost cliche at this point, but Proverbs 3:5-6 telling us to trust and to obey, and he will guide us. Right.
Yeah.
But so often we're like, okay, how are we going to balance our time? How are we going to make all this work? And God is like, well, if you would stop trying to make it work yourself and trust me, be obedient. I got you. I got the path, and I'll send you the students, and all you got to do is say yes.
Yeah. I like that. And it goes with the youth too, because what is one thing that, from a child to a youth, what is one thing that they always say is why? And you're standing in front of 20-something kids, 20-something youth, and they're thinking the same thing as, why am I here? And a lot of them are there because their mom is on the team or whatever. But, they bring a friend, and they might not be asking that, but in their mind, they're sitting there like, or on their phone. You try to keep them, keep them laughing. You keep them, what do you call it? Engaged.
Yeah.
So they're asking why, but they're not asking it to you. So you're having to give if you don't have a why, how are you going to tell your youth why they're here? You know what I mean? And that takes work. And we tell the youth all the time, and I tell them that I'm proud of them all the time. Every Wednesday, I tell them that I love them and I'm proud of them because they showed up. Because you could have been anywhere at any time, doing anything, and whatever you're doing, you could have been doing something else. And I tell them that I was like, I'm proud of them, especially when I have my football boys come in and they're from practice and they're like, well, we get off a little early. I'm like, well, I'm proud that you made it. And I make it a thing to call their name out. I'm like, hey, what's up, Totero? I'm like, how you doing? Like, hey, you made it, man. Hey, Mario, I'm glad you made it, bro. And I let them know. And then what do you call it? Recognition is like a little boost, and
yeah, for sure. But I think that's so important, so key. And I think sometimes we can get bogged down in the details that we forget about the little things like that. Like, man, we got to put ourselves in their shoes.
Oh yeah.
All the pressure that they get. One of the things that I'm noticing, the longer I'm in youth ministry, this is my 20th year, and it seems like, gone are the days of pizza, Mountain Dew, and video games. For youth ministry is like, if we got a free t-shirt and a CD, we were the happiest people in the world. It was like, yes, I got a CD, like everything's good. And now they're like, who cares? Like, I'll take a $50 gift card. We're like,
yeah,
who's got that? Like, and so getting back to the basics of just simple recognition, because, yes, there's like things on social media, but how many times do people hear anymore? I'm proud of you and I love you.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's the thing that I see is like the great equalizer for our students, is that every single one of them just want to make their parents proud, or their guardian, or whoever they have. And for some of them, they don't even have that, And for some of those, especially the students that you were talking about that are lost and broken, some of them may have a great home life, but a lot of them don't. And, you might be the first person in their life to tell them, I'm proud, and especially if they feel like a screw up, all I do is mess up. And
especially if they're having a bad day that day. I mean, and just for someone to tell you that they're loved and they're proud of them, it's like, you don't know the day that I have. And I'm like, well, I bet you I know how to fix it. And I tell them at the end of every service, I'm like, before we go up to pray, and I'm like, hey, you have something on you. I was like, this is where you lay it down.
Yeah.
I was like, whatever your problem is, whatever is something that is on your mind, I was like, this right here, this is where you let it go. And
for sure.
And when they get up, and it's amazing to, man, we had a youth. He started off, he didn't want to be, he thought he was an atheist and all kinds of stuff. And we, at the time, we didn't know, we told him that, look, we're learning together, and when you learn, we learn, and vice versa. And so now he's like, I'm not saying he's singing and jumping for joy, but if I would have asked him the first time I met him, if I would have asked him if he needed me to pray for anything for him, he would have said, no, I'm good. But now I go up to him and I ask him, and he's like, yeah, can you pray for my mom? Can you pray for my school? I mean, he's telling me, and I'm like, I'm proud of you, man. And we pray. And the other day I had met another youth, and I didn't know who he was. And I went and introduced myself, and then I asked him if he needed anything to pray about. And he's like, no, I'm good. And so I ended up talking to his mom, and she's like, he doesn't want to be there. She's like, but I'm making him go. And I was like, look, we had one of those before. I was like, and I'm not intimidated. I was like, if anything, I was like, that's a challenge. I was like, the more that they push away, the more that they pull me to them. I was like, so that does not intimidate me. I was like, if anything, I'm gonna call him out, and I'm gonna pick on him. I mean, at the same time, I'm gonna take care of him, right. But I'm gonna make sure that he is loved and he is welcome there. And it's pretty cool.
We would be bad youth pastors if we didn't, like, it's like you see that student and they're on the fringe, and you're like, oh, okay, challenge accepted. Let's go.
Yeah.
And it's so exciting when you finally get to that place, and it's like you've been working, you've been praying, and other people have been praying and encouraging, and all of a sudden, you feel that kind of tinge, in your heart. A couple of weeks ago, that happened with me. I don't always do altar call type things, but I really felt it. And there's a couple of students that I've been praying for quite a while. And I just said, hey, if there's anybody here who doesn't know Jesus, like, and we've all done it before. And I see 2 hands go up, and both of them were the people I've been praying for a long time.
That's awesome.
And I was like, okay, let me take a step back and make sure they understand what they're praying for. Because I think we do a bad job overall of letting people know like what they're responding to. You know, we do this big altar call and we're like, if you want to know Jesus, and almost every hand goes up and it's always the same kids. And they're like, well, yeah, I want to know Jesus. And I'm like, well, you already know Jesus. You know, what about that kid who doesn't have a relationship? So let me define what this is, and let me define what the prayer is and why the prayer is important. And if that's still you, if that's still something you want to do, let's pray. And they both, you know, I just said, hey, and if you did, I'm not asking for a big spectacle. Just give me a thumbs up, catch my eye before we go into small groups. And both of them gave me a thumbs up, and I was like, okay, contain yourself. This is awesome, because
Like
they're both kids. Exactly, because those are both kids too that don't want the recognition. They don't want it. And I'm like, okay, we can work on that, because you're going to get the recognition that you deserve. But at the same time, like, I don't want them to feel like, you know, it's a big spotlight.
Right. And this is why I don't do it. And this is why I don't say anything. Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to discourage them later. And so it's been cool having conversations with them since. And I can't wait to get to that place where it's like, okay, great, let's talk baptism, you know? And so really excited for those next steps. But my last question is, what advice would you guys have for especially those student pastors who are just really struggling with being obedient in their church? Maybe it's church hurt, or maybe they've gotten into some issues with their ministry or with the staff or something like that. And maybe they're just kind of struggling to stay obedient and to remain faithful where God has planted them.
I would just say, really just take everything to the Lord. And that's because if you think that, you know, if you go back and you think and you let your flesh take over and you're like, oh, well, you know, I feel like I did this, or I offended somebody, and you just let the enemy continue to creep in, and you think, you know, so-and-so feels this way about me, or so-and-so feels this way about me, or I did this wrong. You know, that's really just the enemy coming in and trying to attack you and make you feel that way, or make you feel unworthy, or make you feel like this person is, you know, speaking bad on you or anything like that, when in reality they're not. That's just again, like I said, that's just the enemy trying to do that. And you're doing everything you need to do for the glory of God, and you just need to give it to him and give him all the glory and pray to him and tell him, once you let him know what's going on, and once you're praying to him and you're telling him, you know, hey, I feel like I did this, or I feel this fault, or, you know, I may have said something. Once you've came to him and you've surrendered and you've prayed to him and you told him that, then you're forgiven. Whether you said something or you didn't say anything, you know, you're forgiven, and then it's time to move on. It's time to, like Arthur said, it's time to take the baton and keep it moving. It's not time to dwell on it. You know, there's plenty of souls out there that need to be saved, and there's no time to sit there and hold on what you think that could be happening that's not even happening. Again, like I said, I just think it's the enemy that's trying to push in and go in and take over, and that's not even what it is.
I say we're all here. This is just a season that, you know, this is our season to lead this youth. You know, the pastors before us, that was their season. They led them kids from when they were younger till they grew up till they graduated. And now it's our turn, and it's our season. And for a year or two, I mean, we might be called to go somewhere else and do something else. We do not know that. And so sometimes we get mixed feelings, or, you know, the enemy is trying to make you think something else. But in all reality, as the Lord is like, hey, you know, I'm putting these little things here because you're not going to be here for long. And you don't know that yet. And if you did, you wouldn't like it anyways, like, because nobody likes change, and nobody likes too much change. I mean, we like change when it's a good thing, but when we think we're in a good thing and we change is happening, that's like, hey, I'm good. What are we doing? Like, why are we mixing everything up? Like, everything is good as it is. Like, why are we messing things up? It's like, you know, you don't know what's happening. And I just think that, to answer that question, I think that we're all in a season, and some seasons just last longer than others.
Man, so good.
Like Coach Prime says, it's personal.
Oh man, can we just? Well, that's a whole another conversation. I was like, we could talk about that the rest of the night, and it's already late. So I'm gonna wrap it up. But I just want to say thank you guys so much for joining us, for being part of this.
Thank you.
We really, really hope that it encouraged you guys from where you are, whether you're kind of newer to student ministry or you've been doing it for a long time. Remembering why we do what we do. And if you don't have a why, figure it out, because your students they vitally need you to be able to answer that why for them, or maybe not answer it for them, but help lead them to a place where they're able to figure out what their why is.
Yeah.
And so with all that said, thank you guys so much for listening. We'd be so honored if you guys would share our podcast with your youth pastor friends on social media, or tag a specific episode that really stood out to you on your favorite platform by using @TalkStudentMen. Finally, if you would like to be on the show in the future, like these guys, please reach out to us on social media or send us an email to podcast@studentministryconversations.org. We would love to set up a time for you guys to join us. Have a great week, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.